Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the Foreign Correspondents Club of Japan. My name is Khaldun Azhari, president of this club, and I will be the moderator for this very important event to protect the environment. First, I would like to introduce my guest. To the far right is Miss Hana Heineken. She's senior advisor, Rainforest Action Network. And to my very right, Ms. Yuki Sakamoto, Director, Planning and Research, Global Environmental Forum. And the topic today is titled, Is Tokyo Keeping Its Promise of a Sustainable Olympics? So there's a link between the Olympics and the rainforest. We will know about it more details in the event. It will be for an hour, and half of it will be designated for their presentations, about 15 minutes each, and that will be followed by Q&A. Without further ado, ladies and gentlemen, please welcome our guest speakers for today. Thank you.
Hello, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here. My name is Hana Heineken. I'm from Rainforest Action Network. It's an organization headquartered in San Francisco. We have been around for about 30 years now. Our main focus is to preserve rainforests around the world, with a focus on Southeast Asia. We also work on fossil fuel issues, but today I'm going to be talking about rainforest issues. I'd like to first introduce the issues, the main issues, the problem with the Olympics, the Tokyo Olympics, and then turn it over to my colleague Yuki. The problem with the Tokyo Olympics is in fact a much wider problem related to Japan's timber supply chain. But let me first start with what we found with respect to the Tokyo Olympics. You may have seen the news. It was picked up last week by Bloomberg and Japan Times. We have been monitoring the new Olympic stadium construction, specifically looking at what kind of plywood the construction companies and their subcontractors are using to mold concrete. Some of you may not be familiar with this practice, but in Japan, it's ubiquitous for using tropical plywood to mold concrete, many times for foundation construction. Why are we looking out for this? Because what we've found in our previous research is that a lot of the tropical plywood that's used for concrete formwork plywood in Japan is coming from highly risky areas in Southeast Asia. What I mean by risk is the risk of unsustainability, the risk of illegality, and the risk of human rights abuses. My colleagues, Yuki and her partners, went to the site at the Tokyo Olympic construction stadium site. And what we found was the use of plywood with the marker indicating it belonged to a company called Shenyang. I think you have with you some pictures that we took. I want you to look at that. It's this piece of paper here. The top picture shows the general, the red circle there indicates a marking. The bottom left picture is a zoomed photograph of that. The picture next to that is from a different piece of plywood, but you can see that it says SYE panel. That is the marking of Shenyang. So what is Xinjiang? Xinjiang is one of 6 large logging companies that dominate the logging industry in an area called Sarawak, Malaysia. Sarawak is one of 3 regions in Malaysia. And the state has been having issues with corruption and human rights abuses, and has one of the highest rates of deforestation, tropical deforestation in the world. There's another piece of, there's another brochure, I think, that you grabbed on your way in. It's this Japan's Links to Rainforest Destruction. I want you to open that to the inside page where there's a number of satellite pictures. You can see on the map that's indicated there where Sarawak is. It's in the heart of, it's in the island of Borneo. And these satellite pictures are showing the kind of logging that this company Xinjiang is conducting in an intact tropical forest. The 2 pictures on the far right shows during the course of 1.5 years, they have clearly logged this sensitive tropical forest area in a highly unsustainable way. The pictures also indicate that it is likely illegal. The bottom right picture is a further zoom of the picture on the top right. There's a blue line there which indicates it's a river. Under Sarawak forestry laws, there is a requirement that logging not take place so close to a river. And so this company has been conducting this kind of logging in many parts of Sarawak, but their practices have been particularly egregious in this area called Heart of Borneo, which is actually an area that Malaysia, Indonesia, and Brunei have agreed to try to protect. And so Xinjiang is a highly problematic company. And the fact that the Tokyo Olympic Stadium construction is using plywood supplied by Xinjiang means that there is a high risk that it is derived from very unsustainable logging operations. Let me also just touch on what the risks of human rights abuses is. Xinjiang has also been in conflict with many communities, indigenous communities in Sarawak. Sarawak, there are still a number of indigenous communities that live and rely on the forests. They have what's called customary rights to land. And we have recorded about 300 cases across Sarawak of indigenous groups trying to defend their rights against companies that are involved in, for example, logging or palm oil. Unfortunately, the government of Sarawak is extremely corrupt, and they have been issuing licenses to these companies while neglecting the rights of the people in that land. So the Japanese companies who buy this wood may say it's legal because the Sarawak government says it's legal. But in fact, there have been court cases in Sarawak where government handouts of these licenses have actually been nullified because they were found to be illegal. And as I've indicated, we've seen that from satellite imagery that some of these logging operations look highly illegal, but we can't say for sure that it's illegal because it's hard to get to these areas. And the government is often paid off to not look at these operations and not pay attention to what these logging companies are doing. I'll just say in the past 2 years, because of complaints from the international community and NGOs like us, the government in Sarawak started to acknowledge the high risk of illegality in their forestry sector. And they have been trying to address it. But our view is that their efforts have not been enough, and the risks are still very high. And so, again, the use of timber from Sarawak for Olympic construction, particularly from this company called Shenyang, really questions the standards that the Olympic Committee and the Japanese government is using to ensure the timber is legal and sustainable. I'm going to pause there, and I'll turn it over to my colleague to explain what the Japanese authorities have been doing to try to address this issue.
Hello, my name is Yuki. I'm working with a Japanese non-profit environmental organization based in Tokyo. And I am talking about the communication reaction by the Tokyo 2020 Olympic organizers, namely Japanese government and organizing committee, and Tokyo Metropolitan Government and Japan Sports Center, who are responsible entity for the new Olympic Stadium. We have been communicating and giving information on the risk they might use for their construction for Olympic-related facilities for about last 3 years. And also, we have been informing construction company such as Taisei Corporation, who is a contractor of the National Stadium. And we recognize that those organizers are fully aware of the risk, as Hana already explained, and our concern. And last June, organizing committee publicized its procurement policy on timber products. It should be sustainable, saying. And at that time, when the organizing committee publicized the code, other entities like Tokyo government and JSC kept their position that they would not fully comply with the committee's procurement code. But December last year, Tokyo Governor Koike made positive comments on timber procurement for related facilities under Tokyo government responsibility. So she said she will do as much as possible as a contractee for the Olympic-related facilities. And at that time, at the same timing, we, together with international environmental organization over 40, sent the open letter to the IOC, raising the issue about the standards of the committee. And on the other hand, JSC, responsible entity of the new national stadium, and its contractor, Taisei Corporation, gave us, very unmotivated reaction. They are very reluctant to do something on this issue. And we are very concerned again that there might be risk on the construction for the facilities. And I will talk about the Japanese government countermeasure against illegal logging issue. As many of you may know, Japanese government will enact the new law in coming months, May. It's called Clean Wood Act, which is obligate some Japanese company who willing to avoid trade of illegal wood as obligate due diligence for those companies who really wants to take actions. We, as a Japanese organization, welcome this law as to show Japan's leadership as a responsible timber purchasing countries, since Japan has been committed to strengthening its countermeasure against illegal logging at the last G7 Iseshima Summit. And on this law, the new law, establish a voluntary registration system for wood-related industry and requires companies that have registered to undertake legality due diligence on their timber supply chain. The inclusion of a due diligence requirement for registered company is a very important step forward, but its impact on Japan's timber trade will largely depend on the implementation regulation, which will be finalized soon before enactment of the May. We have been recommending to the Japanese government to set the adequate standard and provide sufficient information for the private sector to conduct robust due diligence measures to avoid trade of high-risk timber. Thank you.
So what Yuki explained the measures that the Japanese government is taking now to try to address these issues. But I want to bring it back to the Olympic Stadium and what kind of measures they're applying for the procurement for the timber there. The Tokyo Olympic Committee, you may be familiar, the authorities for the different facilities differs. The Tokyo Olympic Committee has a timber sourcing standard that's applied to all of the facilities that are temporary. The JSC, the Japan Sports Council, which is part of the Japanese government, is in charge of the national stadium. And the Tokyo government is in charge of all permanent facilities. So already the Tokyo Olympic Committee has its own, adopted a sourcing code, but as Yuki pointed out, it was not applied to the other facilities. We, because of pressure from, I would say, from us, they agreed to apply the Tokyo Olympic timber sourcing code to these other facilities. But in fact, the problem still remains. The Tokyo Olympic timber sourcing code was a huge compromise in favor of the construction companies. This code actually makes a huge exception for concrete formwork plywood. The reason is because the code says that companies, the timber that they will procure should be legal, should be sustainable or from sustainably managed forests. It should respect human rights and the rights of indigenous peoples, and it should be harvested with consideration of worker safety. But in fact, you read it carefully and it says, but concrete formwork plywood, there's an exception. It actually only needs to satisfy the first criteria, which is legality. And if the companies can satisfy the sustainability criteria, then that's preferred, but it's not required. You look further and you find that how are they demanding satisfaction of this legality requirement? And in fact, it is based on this green procurement law, which is the public procurement law in Japan, which is extremely weak. It has no due diligence requirement. And up until now, for as long as it's been in existence, it has allowed timber from, for example, Sarawak, Malaysia, to basically come into this country as legal wood, despite the fact that the risk of illegality in that country has been repeatedly pointed out, including by the UN that actually put out a stat saying it's 50% of the timber there is illegal. So the standards that the Olympic Committee is applying is extremely weak. And I think the fact that this timber was found on the construction site is a clear indicator that the standards are not sufficient to avoid the sourcing of illegal or timber that is of high risk of illegality or high risk of unsustainability. We should point out that we have been in communication with the Japanese government recently about this because we did share our evidence with them and they wanted to explain themselves. What they told us was that the wood that we found that belonged to Shenyang was from a certified area in Sarawak, a certified concession. The certification is called PEFC. You may know that there's two main types of forest certification: FSC, the Forest Stewardship Council, and PEFC. And they said that because this is PEFC certified, it meets the criteria for the Olympic Committee. We don't agree that this is a guarantee of sustainability or respect for human rights, or possibly of the legality criteria. What we understand is that Shenyang does have a PEFC certified operation in Sarawak. However, in this area, there is still conflict with indigenous communities. The certification that's used there is they rely on what's called a Malaysian timber certification standard, which has been repeatedly criticized for being very weak and ignoring the rights of indigenous people. And additionally, we understand that even the timber that is being PEFC certified is actually mixed with 30% of timber that is not certified. So in fact that saying that it's certified is actually not true, because it's been heavily diluted. So again, the risk remains that this wood is linked with all these egregious issues. And we feel that if Tokyo Olympics is insistent on using this tropical plywood, they need to really understand where this timber is coming from, in what context. And from what we've seen, they haven't been willing to do that. I'll just note that this is indicative of a much wider problem in Japan. Concrete formwork plywood in Japan is used in most large construction projects in Japan. The majority comes from Indonesia or Malaysia. Probably over 95%. And the reason is because the wood is cheap, and it's because it doesn't have a grain, and so it looks good. And because the wood is hard, and so, again, it allows construction workers to use it as is rather than putting some other kind of strengthening on it, plastic or whatnot. In our view, that's no excuse. The rainforests are continuing to disappear, and that's not just, it's not just something that environmental groups are concerned about or should be concerned about. In fact, as you all know, rainforests are essential for our climate. It's essential for the water, the rain patterns in the world. It's essential for biodiversity, and it provides the livelihoods of over 1 billion people. And in fact, a lot of our medicines are also derived from vegetation in rainforests. So we are highly reliant on rainforests, and the fact that this wood is being consumed for use as concrete formwork plywood in Japanese construction projects, used 2 or 3 times and then thrown away, is extremely wasteful, extremely unsustainable, and in no way is compatible with the Tokyo Olympics commitment to sustainability. So that's, we are seeking an investigation. We are asking for the Olympic organizers to conduct an investigation into where this timber is actually coming from, and frankly, where the other timber that they're using is coming from. They have told us that over 3/4 of the concrete formwork plywood they use is reused, so meaning it has been used once somewhere else and they're using it again, and therefore it's okay. In our view, that's not right. It's going to be used somewhere, and it shouldn't be used for the Olympics. So I think, again, for the Olympics in particular, if they want to be serious about their sustainability, they need to do better due diligence on their supply chains. But this is what we're saying to the Japanese government and companies generally is that they need to clean up the timber supply chain, because at some point the rainforests are going to disappear if they don't change their practices. And it's not just their businesses that's going to suffer, it's all of us that's going to suffer from those impacts. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much for your insights and your call for investigation. And we would like to open the floor to your Q&A, and I would like to take the first question. Please proceed to the front microphone. Yes? All right, while you scratch your head. Let me ask the first question, as usual. You said that they are not allowed to go near the sites. Some people or some activists at the Sawarok forest. Why is that? Who is preventing, like you from, or some activists from approaching that site of the wood and timber there?
Do you mean in terms of doing an investigation into the timber practices there?
Yes, I mean, is it kind of, there is some police preventing people to go there and investigate on the spot?
We understand, so this brochure was not produced by my organization, but another one in the UK called Global Witness. And they have done a lot of field investigations in Sarawak. One of the reasons why some of these pieces of evidence are satellite imagery is because, one, the timber concessions are actually quite deep in the forest. It's very far, and so it takes quite a number of resources to get there. But fortunately, there's a lot of satellite imagery available. There's also satellite services that allow for monitoring of deforestation activity. It's called Global Forest Watch. And so it is feasible to check what's going on in these areas through the use of satellite. But in terms of ground investigation, we understand that when Global Witness did this investigation, they were basically, at some point when they were found out that they were doing this investigation, they were escorted out. Because frankly, the government doesn't want people to see what's going on. And it's hard to, they will show we understand that some companies, for example, in Japan, have visited Sarawak to see what's going on, following, our engagement with us on the issues. But they were only able to see the better forest operations. So, frankly, the government is trying to hide what are more kind of egregious examples of logging in Sarawak. And I think therefore we just have to resort to either undercover activity or investigations or to satellite. But from what we have been able to gather, I think it's very clear that the situation entails a lot of risks.
Questions? Yes, please.
Yeah, I'm not press. I don't know.
It's all right. We give you exception for the environment's sake.
Yeah, thank you. For this presentation, my name is Peter van den Berg. I work with the Netherlands Embassy here in Tokyo. I have two short questions. The first one is, and to what extent would you really relate this problem to the Tokyo Olympics? Because I got the impression this seems to be more a problem of how Japan copes with its supply chains for infrastructural projects in general. So that's the first question. And the second is, have you revised issues like this with previous huge sporting events, and what was your uptake from that, and what might be relevant in that for Tokyo?
Right. I think in terms of the relationship to the Tokyo Olympics and versus Japan's overall timber supply chain, yes, this is indicative of a wider problem in Japan's timber supply chain, but we are making issue of this of the Olympics because they have publicly committed to making this sustainable. And so we feel that this is not consistent with what they have publicly pledged. For other sports events, I'll give the London Olympics as an example. They ensured that all of the timber that they used is FSC certified or PEFC certified. Of course, in our view, PEFC certified in many cases is not sufficient. PEFC is highly reliant on the standards in the country where the timber harvesting is happening. It uses that country's system. So there's quite a number of variety. I don't know the details of the due diligence process used in the Olympics at London, but they did ensure that all timber that they used was certified. So we have been saying to the Tokyo Olympic organizers from the beginning, look, London has done it, so can you. But I think given the situation with, given the way in which timber is procured and used in Japan, I think that really held them back from meeting the kind of standards that London has.
Joel Fitzpatrick from Kyoto News. You're saying it's more of a cultural thing in Japan for them to use these sort of construction methods. What are some of the more concrete, maybe not the best word to use, but the best ways that they can change their practices in order to reduce the use of these sort of products?
質問がよく分かんない。
代替剤として何ができるのか、こういう問題を避ける。
As a alternative to tropical plywood, there is a certified tropical wood, tropical plywood for concrete formwork also. And also domestic timber can be used for plywood, for concrete formwork. So there is alternative. So it's a choice by the organizers which one they want to use, I think.
Yeah, I mean, there is FSC certified tropical plywood, for example, from Indonesia and also from Russia and Canada that's been mixed with domestic wood. So it is available, and we have been told by plywood manufacturers in Japan that supply domestic concrete formwork plywood that they could easily meet the demands of the Olympic Stadium construction. So it is unfortunate that they are using tropical plywood when, as you may know, there was a strong commitment to use domestic wood for the stadium construction. And they're doing so for the wood that remains in the stadium, but they're not following that standard for wood that's going to be used for molding and then taken out.
Thanks. Yes. All right. Let me ask you, do you have a question here, there? No. All right. How much percentage the wood coming from Sarawak to Japan in terms of two other countries? And what's the Shinian company? Shinian, is it Chinese company as the name sounds? Thank you.
So the volume of in Japan is the the largest importer of tropical plywood in the world. The volume of tropical plywood that they buy has been decreasing a little bit, but they still remain the top importer. And as I said, most of that, so 90% of that comes from Indonesia or Malaysia, and then there's some from China, largely, or Vietnam. And Sarawak has been typically supplying, so about half of the wood, let me say, about 1/3 of all the wood that's being exported by Sarawak has typically been purchased by Japan over the last, I'd like to say 20 years. And during that time, Sarawak has been heavily deforested, so you can see the connection. And so I don't have the exact numbers yet of how much that wood equates to, but it is a significant amount. So Japan has a huge responsibility to address its timber supply chain because, frankly, its timber sourcing practices are closely linked to deforestation in Malaysia, deforestation in Indonesia, before then, deforestation in the Philippines. And now I think you're starting to see deforestation in Myanmar, and Japan is starting to source from Myanmar. So unless things change, it's just going to be deforesting one country to the next. And that's just not acceptable.
I just want to zoom out a little bit to the IOC itself. So Sochi, there was quite a bad reputation for their environmental standards. Rio, there was the golf course. There was a big issue over ripping up natural areas for that. Do you think this is more of a systemic problem with the IOC, and they're not taking the issue seriously long term? And what responses do you get from the international body when you go to them with your evidence?
So we haven't engaged with the IOC with respect to the other Olympics, but when we did approach them last December, indicating that there's a huge risk that this kind of timber would be used for the Tokyo Olympics, they did receive our letter and said that they will look into it. And we understand that since then, they did bring it up with the Tokyo authorities and the Olympic organizers, and they secured a commitment from both the Japan Sports Council and the Tokyo Metropolitan Government to follow the standards of the Tokyo Olympic Committee. So we did ask for uniformity among the standards that are used by those three entities, but we also simultaneously pointed out that that Olympic Committee standard is inadequate. And they did not address that. So I don't want to generalize about their attitude toward these issues. I mean, I think their 2020 agenda makes it clear that they are committed to sustainability and to leaving a good legacy. And I think those are great goals. And our task is to show them that that's not being met if they don't do something about it. So hopefully they're taking actions behind the scenes. I would encourage you to inquire with them directly, but we don't have any further information than that.
I'm Kiyoshi Takenaka from Reuters. Your press release says the environmental organizations concerned are seeking an open investigation into the matter by a credible environmental auditor. And do you see any signs that such investigation will be taking place? The authorities are willing to launch such investigation. If not, do you see any reason? Do you see any probable reason for them not to? Thank you.
Actually, we have been informed by the Japanese, organizing committee and JSC, informing, as Hana already explained, we found the private we found at the site is certified, PFC certified private. And they believe it's, they meet the standard procurement policy of the committee because it's certified. So, as far as I understand, that's all. Further investigation, they are not preparing, I think. But as Hana says, we, even though the certification does not, secure the sustainability, we need to know where the sources are coming from. So we need to ask them to investigate and open that information.
Thank you. We still have time for more questions if you have. And all right, let me check my notes. Do you? Let me think about. What about the impact on the wildlife in Sarawak? Impact of this lodging on the wildlife in Sarawak.
The wildlife?
Yes, if you have any data. Thank you.
I can't give specific numbers on that, but I can say that, so Shenyang, so this area called the Heart of Borneo that I pointed out, which is in the middle of Borneo, is estimated, according to the WWF, to house about 6% of all land-based biodiversity in the world. And while Shenyang's activities is just one part of that, based on research by Global Witness, they were decimating about, what was it? Just looking for the figure.
Sorry, I'm asking difficult questions.
No, it's okay. It's not here. They were decimating rainforests at a significant rate. I mean, you can just see from these pictures here that I previously showed over the course of 1.5 years how much the rainforests have been fragmented. And basically what this company has often done is to go through the rainforest once, twice, maybe 3 times, chopping the wood, and then clearing it and turning into palm oil plantations, where basically biodiversity really can't exist in these plantations. So you're losing immense biodiversity by converting these intact forests into just never-ending palm oil plantations. And you may have seen pictures of orangutans being rescued because of clearance from palm oil. This is a huge problem for both, the animals that we readily recognize, but also the types of vegetation. There's immense biodiversity in terms of trees in the rainforest. And so, and a lot of these are indigenous to these areas. So it's a huge impact.
I think we can entertain more questions. Last question. All right, let me ask again. Yeah,
sorry, I did just find the figure in their report. So Global Witness had estimated about 40 soccer fields a day. Soccer fields of forest were being basically decimated per day by this company.
What nationality?
Shenyang is a Malaysian company. I believe they are Chinese Malaysian, but don't quote me on that.
Okay, thanks. All right. We live in Japan, and we notice the Japanese standard and regulations are very strict on, for example, the waste. So there's a big unburnable days for the waste, and if you go somewhere, you see many big cans, big tanks to. This is for can. This is for glass. This is for this, and also the books are neatly put on the street to be picked up by the trucks. So we feel that this country respects very much the recycling and clean environment. So when you tell us Japanese companies are consuming this amount of wood, plywood, I feel you are, not serious or maybe not realistic. There is kind of contradictory about what we see here and what the companies are doing outside. So do you have any explanation why is that? If a country careful so much about this recycling and being clean and protecting the environment here in Japan, if you go to some forest or some hike, you feel there's a small tree, it's so much protected, and there's a registry on the tree, and you can't even touch the tree, but they disseminate forest every day, by 40 soccer stadiums. So is it like Mr. Jekyll and Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde in the Japanese companies, or what's the problem? Thank you.
It's a great question. I'm puzzled often by it too. I mean, I think one of the reasons, maybe it's indicative of Japanese attitude generally. If it's happening overseas, we can ignore the impacts. I'd like to say that's not true, but there are other examples of that. And I think another reason is that there's been a slowness in Japanese companies recognizing the social and environmental risks associated with their businesses. I think there's been too much focus on whether it's legal or not. As you know, internationally, the OECD, there's the multinational guidelines, the guidelines for multinational enterprises, which clearly states that companies do need to do their due diligence on these environmental, social impacts. We have the Sustainable Development Goals now. We have the guiding principles on business and human rights. And all of these are not just reliant on legality. But I think in Japan, there's been a very slow recognition of the responsibility of companies to really be mindful of the impacts in their supply chains. And we do see the situation changing a little bit through our engagement with a number of trading companies. They have started to look into their supply chains, and we've encouraged that. We've supported that, but it's, you know, compared to companies in Europe or the U.S., where frankly a lot of them will not source from areas like Sarawak, Malaysia. They say it's too high risk. But in Japan, they're assured by the company and the government that this is good wood and it's cheap, so they buy it. So that's I think it's just a difference in appreciation of the risks in the supply chain, and hopefully that's changing. I think it is changing, but Japan's been behind.
Right. Thank you. I think this wraps up our event today. Thank you very much for coming and give us updates about the destruction of the rainforests. And we hope your alarm call will reach the right ears and things go better, for the better and for the best of next generations and this planet. Thank you very much for coming today, and thank you for coming, you too, and have a nice evening. Thanks.
Thank you.